you know, density is based on occupants per unit, as well as beds per, or beds per unit or bedrooms per unit, to clarify that. So we say we've got, 560 bedrooms with 56 bedrooms with 56 people is different from 56 bedrooms with what would that be if you put four people in a bedroom? 224 people per, in that space. That's a very different thing. So thinking through how we clarify that in our, I guess that would be in our rental program as well. So we're going to have some moving pieces that we have to think about. The other thing that we can think about is there a minimum acre, on the PD process, in addition to having kind of a vision for areas, catalyst areas and other places. That was one thing in the Kennesaw ordinance. And one thing that Matt talked about the other day is that we need to consider, like, it's to bring a PD forward, you have to have a minimum of 5 acres, 6 acres, whatever we think is appropriate. So there may be areas that we don't want that, where gap tooth might, as David called it last week, might be, the right thing to happen. But where, bigger projects could happen, we say we set a minimum acreage that the PD has to come forward outside of whatever straight zoning allows at that point. So number of things that we need to have on our list there. And one of the things in the first public hearing that was actually a really good point that Tal Slan made was that, we hear a lot about what we don't want. I think in this, we need to be thinking about what we do want, in these areas, and what we want this new development process to, what the outcomes of that we want to see happen. I think David has his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Fran that we can't continue to kick this can down the road. We have a window here that's going to be open. I don't think it's a tall order to come up with a definition of purpose-built student housing very quickly, and to redefine our definition of density from bedrooms to either occupants or beds. And then to limit, I mean, I just think that a purpose-built student housing ban is it's a less sweeping regulation. I like the exception that Chris brought up of replacement of, that you could go in to replace, although I'm concerned that I see the student housing being developed around here. I don't see it being built in a way that it's going to be the same problem in 10, 15, 20 years, the way it's being built. Some of these projects, I mean, we're basically recreating housing slums in effect. So, I think that exception, but I think there needs to be some standards on how that replacement would occur. And I think we all need to keep in mind in the commercial districts, mixed uses, housing and retail together is a good thing. Okay. And so, I would be cautious about banning all housing in commercial districts, because actually the impact of, let's say, commercial office space and retail could potentially be even higher than student housing in some ways, right, at certain times of the work week. So, I think we have to be careful about banning entirely in CP, but I think it's a relatively easy stretch to get a good definition of purpose-built student housing in the books, define occupancy in a better way that avoids this thing, and then move forward with a focused ban that, in my mind, is probably more legally defensible than a big sweeping ban. But that's my opinion. I'm not a lawyer.
Bob, one other thing what David just said, I think it is important because I think the market is going to allow for a lot of non-student mixed use in the city over the next 10 years. So you definitely don't want to discourage that. They won't be big projects, but I can see where someone comes in and mixes retail and and housing, and it could be active adult. It could be, there are a lot of different things that it could be. So I mixed use, whether it's retail, office, and then housing, definitely has its place, and we don't want to discourage that. So I agree with that completely.
Yeah, and that I'm not getting at like we should ban, and again, I think obviously there's a market for, and there's probably a place for student housing, but getting it to come through a PD process that we have a great deal more control over, that we've got some smart rules of engagement and a vision for what we want to see from that, and where we want to see it, and how we want to see it occur, is important. Because another recommendation in the plan is that we do diversify our economy, and part of that is office and professional space as well. So one of the recommendations is to explore the possibility. It was one of the things that the university actually showed a degree of excitement about, was a business incubator space in the downtown area as a possibility. So again, I like mixed use housing, and again, if we were getting we're not getting healthy housing plus retail commercial at the moment. That again, we've got to think through how we incentivize that, so when we do have mixed use, it truly is mixed use, and there's an incentive to make it mixed use, and that it goes beyond, and we get more than simply student housing, raised crawl space, mostly empty retail on the ground floor. Fran.
So I don't want to sort of lose hold of what David just said. So if we can agree on that term, the purpose-based student housing, which I think is great, why don't we sort of go ahead with that and then decide what would that mean in terms of, so would the notion be that would be limited and not allowed in commercial zoning areas? What would it actually say? I like the term, and I guess I'm lobbying that we use that term. I think that captures the issue that drove this whole process, to be honest. Sort of the purpose-built student housing at the edges of other zoning areas. But so if we went with that term, Bob, how would we fit that in with the verbiage that you used at the beginning in terms of what you're proposing?
I think it's a subset of what we need to do to accomplish what we're thinking about here. And I think the first thing we have to do is that our status quo zoning ordinance allows for conditional residential use under the mixed use, idea of mixed use. We need to, the purpose of the moratorium, the purpose that again goes too far with the proposed ordinance ban on multifamily housing. We've got to do something there first. And I don't think just creating a purpose-built student housing, that's a subset of what we need to do. Absolutely. But I think first we need to get to the point where anyone that wants to do residential in our non-residential zones, instead of having this relatively wide open ability to do so under straight zoning at high densities with the conditional use, we need to take that off the table and put it back in through a PD process. Then we can say, in the PD process, here are areas where our purpose-built student housing, regulations, whatever policies, zoning can happen. So that's, to me, I see that as the second step in the equation, or a sub-step in the equation, is that when we define purpose-built student housing, we say, yes, PDs in this area that include purpose-built student housing are appropriate in catalyst areas 1, 3, and 5, or whatever it might be, that allow for, you know, additional density over, you know, no housing, or lower density, like 56 to 100 beds under straight zoning, whatever it is. Does that make sense? That we've got to deal with that first, or simply putting in purpose-built student housing doesn't take care of the status quo issue that we currently have in our commercial zoning designations that allows for high density residential to occur.
So is purpose-built student housing, does that mean it's students live there, or is it actually designed differently that it would never, you know, so if you took one of these things on 93 where students live right now, and someone decided to convert that to just apartments for people, does that change it from student purpose to general, or what defines the student base? Is it the way it's designed? Is it who lives there? Is it the amenities to it? And does it differentiate other than, you know, the nature of the people who live there?
David?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a design definition. I haven't seen what definitions in other zoning ordinances, how they define it right now, but it's 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, common living area is by inherently a purpose-built student housing. That would be one of my definitions. Now, there's certain amenities and certain leasing arrangements that would be also assigned to that. But you know, 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, with a common living area that's not really a household kind of living area. It's dormitory. It's dormitory housing is what it is. It's contemporary dormitory, not the dormitories we all grew up with in Johnstone Hall and gang bathrooms and stuff like that. But it's basically dormitory housing, off-campus dormitory housing is what it is.
And I think the square footage is reversed from traditional housing, where the private bedroom and bathroom square footage would exceed the common space square footage.
Yeah.
Where
So there's physically a design.
if the student market dried up, it'd be very difficult to repurpose that because humans don't typically live like that.
Right. Exactly.
What are you saying about students? They're inhuman? They're not humans?
Well, I mean, it's a lot better than a traditional dorm for that. There's no doubt about it.
Hey.
But
Bob, the other with purpose-built student housing is now it is individually leased, and generally there's parental guarantees. So a lot of the lenders now don't want to see one lease with 4 people on it. They want 4 individual leases with 4 parental guarantees.
Right.
So it's not just leased by the bed, but it's individual leases. That's what really makes it different. And I agree with David on some of, you know, 4 bedroom, 4 bath, 5 bedroom, 5 bath. You will see a lot more 2 bedroom, 2 bath, which certainly could be converted to other uses. And the reason for a lot more 2s now is because all anyone really has built is 4s for the last 20 years, because of the model of one kitchen. And you know, they're essentially, I mean, they're very nice, most of these things that have been built in the last 20 years, but it is difficult for, you know, looking at a family of 4 to move into these things. But I think the parental guarantee and the individual lease can help you define it even further if we need to.
That's good. Okay. Yep, I've lived that life of co-signing.
Yeah. So, so let me ask this as a starting point. Comfort level on a recommendation going forward that we take the conditional use of residential off the table and say any projects that propose residential uses in our commercial zoning, in our commercial non-residential zoning districts must come forward through the PD process. As if we were going to make a recommendation to Planning Commission and Council. Or as an alternative, do we set the density at 56 beds an acre or some other acceptable number that, 56 beds an acre, and I just use that because that's our maximum density in our residential zones right now.
Well, I would not be for banning all housing in commercial districts.
It's not banning all housing in commercial districts.
Well,
It's causing what I'm saying is that it's causing housing and residential uses, instead of coming through as a completely by right, process, that it has to come through a PD process. So it's not a ban.
But it is essentially a ban if you can't assemble the acreage to qualify for a PD. And
right. So that's again a subset of what we need to think about there.
What would be good in downtown Clemson is the small parcels. So aren't we already seeing a replacement for Knickerbocker on the boards? Where small parcels with retail below and housing above could be a good thing if it's not purpose-built student housing, right? And so you're effectively banning housing unless you can assemble a large parcel. And so you're actually banning the organic growth and replacement of building stock downtown in that measure.
Well, you can also then, again, I think you come back in with overlays at that point where you could have, different rules of engagement. And that's where the vision for our catalyst areas or any areas that we define that are currently commercially zoned, where we say, 93, here's what we're looking for. Core downtown, here's what we're looking for. Uptown, here's what we're looking for. Clemson Triangle, here's what we're looking for, with those overlay districts that outline how you could bring that forward. So let's say, Knickerbockers, for example, 56 beds an acre probably is what I don't even know, Tom, could you get more than 56 beds an acre on Knickerbocker without going, 80 feet?
Typically, if you look at what they did where Amici is, that was a full acre where the old Mellow Mushroom used to be. And by the time they got parking and the Amici and the copy shop, I think they ended up with 40 to 50, maybe 60 beds total
Right.
on that 1 acre. And that architecturally, I mean, people can weigh in on whether they like it or not, but that just kind of is a example of a standalone 4-student, really a difficult, that's not a financially, I don't know how something like that works. But in the end, that's CM zoning, and that's all the beds they were able to get on that. So in order to, even with 100 beds per acre, as the Planning Commission has put in there, I think they were able to maximize only about 50 or 60. It's difficult. It's not a good project to do that, in my opinion, but that's
Right.
what you get.
So, and I mean, so Knickerbockers is much smaller than that site. And I mean, you couldn't do what you're talking about there. I mean, you could, but it's not even going to approach 56 beds an acre with what you could do with that one single site. You would have to assemble more. And even if you assembled more, you know, an acre of downtown, we're probably talking what to get you'd have to get Knickerbockers down to Tiger Sports Shop, you know, to get an acre in there.
Yeah.
And then you're at a limit, and the way that site is laid out, it would be massively difficult to do something like what you're talking about there, David.
No, what I'm saying is, but if you ban housing, you prohibit putting housing on top of a replacement for Knickerbocker.
Right, but we're not necessarily banning it. We're just saying that it has to come through a different process.
But if you can't assemble enough property for a PD, you're banning.
Right, but again, we can set what those property limits are based on overlay districts and what we want to get. It doesn't have to be a citywide, you know, standard. We could say uptown, you know, this area, you've got to assemble X acres. In this catalyst area, you only have to assemble this, or in this area, you lay out the rules of engagement for catalyst areas and overlays.
So that's getting to be a complicated ban, right? So
it's not a ban. Stop using the word ban. Yeah.
Banning commercial. Okay. I misunderstood.
No, we're not banning commercial. We are creating a different method that if you are proposing residential in our non-residential zoned districts, that you have to bring it through a different new development process.
And so the PD area requirement would be released.
Say again?
So you could have a PD of any size, any acreage.
It would, I think that the way to do that would be to set the rules of engagement for PDs based on several districts in town that we create. That we say this district, you know, because of the, you know, here's what we want. Here's the character. Here's what we want to have happen in this area. Here's what we want to protect. And so this is how these projects can occur here. This district is different. We have different goals for this district. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what we would be talking about. And I don't think we have to, you know, we've got some chunks that make sense to do that. There are other people with their hands up, and I have no idea what the order was.
Christine had her hand up first.
All right, thank you, and Christine.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as a design professional, I've been involved with an amended PD in the city of Greenville, and I had to lead a huge team of people to get this thing amended. It took 6 months. We basically had to do the entire project, and it was all conditional on approval with the city. So we had a lot of meetings with them, and it was finally filed with the state with our attorney. And it was about 1.5 inches thick. And it's a tremendous amount of work. But it does offer, I can really see where it could offer Clemson, if we get our ducks in a row and the size limitations, it will offer us a tremendous amount of protection on what we want to see happen. And that's really the important thing. And my second question is, I hear Fran is working on some stuff, but is she our go-to person to actually write what we want to have happen? Or is that Shannon's new job? It doesn't seem like it is, but I just need some clarification there of, you know, who is actually doing the writing for this. And it seems like we need a rough draft of that if we're all in agreement, or at which point we are, so that we can move forward to the next step.
Well, a couple things. What we're getting at is what our recommendation as a committee would be to Planning Commission and Council, and Planning Commission and Council will, you know, take that as a piece of input as they consider the revisions, and then Planning Commission, Council, staff will write up whatever the new, potentially a new revised version of this proposed ordinance might be. So that's the process for this specific thing. Now, in the future, Shannon will be helping us coordinate that work with whomever, might do that. Like, for example, if this was something that Todd's group was going to do, she would coordinate with Todd's group to make sure all of that's happening in the background and manage the communication and help manage that work. Okay. So that would be her role. And again, on Monday night, I should have said that in the beginning. Council did recommend that Andy move forward with negotiating a contract. So he's working on that. That will be on the agenda, hopefully for the next council meeting, and then Shannon will hit the ground running.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, and I agree with David. And we've got some real small sites in Clemson, and so that size should be addressed as well, so as to not throw out smaller areas that do need redevelopment or are a good opportunity for retail and living above. So.
Yeah, and I think we need to think about those things with character. Like, let's take the core of downtown, for example. If as redevelopment occurs there, I think we probably need to do some thinking about what we want that to be and what we want that to look like and how we want that to feel as we go forward. If we allowed, let's say we're in a situation where someone could come in, and even in small projects at a time, where downtown changes from what it currently is to something that looks like the Amici building, for example, or we've got Gaptooth where some of that's happening. That fundamentally changes, our downtown in a way that probably most people would not be comfortable with or happy to see, right? So I think that's what we need to do, that thinking. And that's why, a downtown, an uptown, for these key areas that we're thinking about, the key areas where purpose-built student housing could or would go, where, other areas in our current commercially zoned corridors. So Ken, were you next?
Yes. Thanks.
All right.
I really like this conversation and just sort of the thinking through this process. I think part of our thinking about conditions, restrictions where necessary, but also describing what we want and in incentivizing that is going to be very important. I mean, Christine's example of the Greenville, it suggests that we really need to be able to do that, because earlier Tom mentioned, even in the PD areas, developers, they're in arounds there. And so I think with that group, I think it's going to be very important for us to do what we're doing in terms of thinking through the different possibilities, because the developers are going to be looking for ways around and being able to cut through. So that's why you had 1.5 inches thick, and the attorney having to present it, because they're very influential and they're going to be pushing back where they think is necessary. So I think incentivizing and laying it all out and just saying, this is the new process now. And this is the process we have to go through, and it's more planned as opposed to each individual project ad hoc, not necessarily adhering to any plan, but I think that's going to be very important going forward. And I appreciate Tom's perspective on this committee and what the value it adds to our thinking.
Fran.
So maybe we're thinking about it. I'm almost thinking about a two-stage process with two pieces to it. I think first of all, we do need to, if we do this, rethink and revisit the PD process, the acreage, all those kinds of things. So I think we need to go back and do that. But to me, a process might be stage one is if it's purpose-based student housing, it's no. Frankly, it's just no, because I think that's been an issue. If it's not that, then I think it goes to stage two of the newly revised PD process. that maybe does open things up a little bit. I think the PD right now, from what Todd is just on the chat, is 2 to 4 acres, for instance, for PD. Maybe we need to lighten up the PD requirements if this is the way we go, so that there is more latitude to do it. But I would say that, given the sense I have, if it's purpose-based student housing, the answer is going to be no in CM districts. And if the answer is not, if it's not that kind of housing, then I think PD might be appropriate, with newly revised PD processes and requirements that maybe address some of the things that Christine can tell us were issues in Greenville that we can avoid. Todd certainly knows that. Well, we've all been somewhat involved in PDs. But anyway, maybe there's two steps to this, as opposed to just it goes right to a PD. But I think in any case, the PD process requirements might need to be tweaked to meet some of the specifics, things like David mentioned, that would be useful to the city and beneficial, that maybe right now can't go to PD.
David?
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. The thing I think we just need to be aware of the unintended consequences. What Chris described is a process that a small property owner on a small project would be hard pressed to do. So it may incentivize the putting together parcels for bigger projects to justify the expense and risk associated with what she described. Now, downtown, in my mind, is going to be a very different kind of place if it has a bunch of big projects as opposed to the small incremental things. In that, if we want to preserve the character downtown, we want to be promoting organic, smaller kind of development, along with, in certain places, maybe some larger projects. But be careful of the unintended consequences of making everything go through the process that Chris described, because that's going to incentivize accumulation of properties and larger buildings and larger single projects.
Right. So if, in that case, if we set if we just change the conditional use of housing to something that set it at 56 beds an acre or less, then your concern in downtown, actually it makes it easier for those little projects to happen that couldn't be more than 56 beds an acre. Once people have assembled property and want to do something bigger than that, then they would go into the PD process. And we could create an overlay that if everybody gets together and says, we don't want, here's the rules of engagement for downtown. We don't want to see buildings over 35 feet or whatever it is at the moment. We want to see this character. We want to see, much stronger architectural standards that are in place. Again, character standards that we want, modern brutalism, or we want small town charm, or we want mountain village, whatever it is, and have the architectural standards that get at that. That's what we need to think about. And this doesn't have to be applied to, we don't have to apply these rules again through the overlay process. We can apply different rules of engagement to different important areas. Christine, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and I just had a thought. I mean, David's right. This is a very expensive and long process for an owner to go, or developer to go through, and it's not guaranteed. And what we were working on was an amended PD, because we had one to deal with, and we actually created a new one. Anyway, I'm just asking this question to see if it's a possibility. In order to preserve the downtown, could it be developed into one large PD, working with the overlay, so that it's not burdensome for one person to come in and want to do one project within it? Is that a possibility? And that would kind of free up some things, I would think.
Yeah, and I think you could, again, we could create an overlay. We could call it the downtown, the core downtown preservation district or whatever, and say, all right, changes can be made, but here's how they can be made in this area, and here's what can happen. And you could have Knickerbockers or whoever propose a new project that's different from what's there, but does not fundamentally change whatever character we set for that area. That and there could be ways to do that under straight zoning.
I think that might be good and offer the protection I think that we're all looking for, because a PD is a legal document. It is, in the end, it is filed with the state of South Carolina in Columbia, and it's the law.
Yeah, it becomes the zoning for that piece of property and for that project. And
it has a lot of teeth.
Yeah,
it has a lot of teeth.
And the good thing, yeah, it is a cumbersome, a little bit, it's a more cumbersome process, but the PD does give the city ultimate control over the approval
and protection
and protection over what that becomes, which is the advantage. That even when and it's not so much that the developers can find an end around in that case, as you are going to go with the ebbs and flows of what the planning commission that's appointed and the council that's elected that have different ideas about what's acceptable, because those are the groups that are approving the PDs. So right now, a PD might not be passed by the current planning commission and council, but in 4 years or 8 years or 2, whatever it is, that, the planning commission and council and the public might be willing to have other and different things occur, thought about in a different, think about things in a different way. So again, if we want to make a recommendation to planning commission and council for the 20th, the big question is our current zoning ordinance, if something is not done, will allow for the same kinds of development to occur in our commercial districts that have been occurring. David.
So just as a matter of procedure, and in the effort to address Fran's concern about kicking the can down the road, and knowing we have the 20th as deadline, we have a meeting next week before the 20th, correct?
Right.
So here's what I propose doing to get this more action oriented is I think we should come up with options that are written down that spell out the things that the potential directions we could recommend, and then we just vote on them. I mean, otherwise we're talking this through, but I think getting it down in writing and making clear, because I may have a misunderstanding of your idea of the ban and PD and all that.
Not a ban.
Well,
I'm banning the use of the word ban, David. Banning the use of the word ban.
With this so we wrote this down and had it all in words that we could all agree to or amend. I think then we'd be getting that may be the way we need to go in the future. Maybe getting our project manager on board can help us with that. But that's what I would suggest we do for next week. I've got to leave.
Okay.
So can I recommend that we do that and defer this recommendation until next week?
Okay, I will. Here's what I'll do. I'll create a Google Doc as soon as we're done. I'll sit here and do this. I will write something up, try to include some of the issues that we've talked about today, and make a initial proposal for what a recommendation we might make as a group that goes to planning commission and council for that work session. And then I'll share that with everybody, and you can provide feedback, edits, thoughts and comments on that, and we can use that for our meeting next week. Okay. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds like a good plan.
Yep.
Thanks,
And,
everybody.
Yep. Good luck.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
All right, if everybody else could hang on for just a minute. Any other thoughts, anything else that you want me to include in that? And I'm going to try to do a little summarization of what we've talked about this morning. So first thing is to address the current ability under straight zoning or under the current zoning ordinance for commercial through mixed use and the conditional use of residential in our commercial zones, to address that so that we are not at status quo of
And
what
again,
Go
should
ahead.
conditional use be special exception?
Okay.
Special exception, as an example, applies to a church going into a residentially zoned area. They're not allowed, but it's an exception.
Okay.
Special, yeah.
So change it. I like that. Change it from conditional use to a special exception.
Yes.
Okay.
Has a little more teeth.
Gotcha. All right. And then that we do have a multitude of other issues to think about in relation to that, including, do we want to think about purpose-built student housing as a zoning designation, or policies related to purpose-built student housing? Do we want to think about in particular, in some areas, think about the minimum acreage required for any of these special exceptions to come forward, or when PDs come forward that, that include purpose-built student housing or residential uses, that there be a minimum acreage, that we think through our rental program policies so that we further clarify the density and number of people that are actually living in these projects. Again, if we have 100 bedrooms with 400 people living in them, that's different than 100 bedrooms with 100 people living in them. So what the maximum occupancy of the beds or bedrooms is. Again, thinking about how we frame this in what we want language instead of what we don't want, language. What else? What am I missing?
Can I ask Tom a question?
Sure.
The fear I have with the purpose-built student housing isn't an immediate issue. I think it's what it could possibly lead to 20, 30 years from now, because if we're having purpose-built student housing in our commercial corridors, which is our economic engine, and say that market goes away because online classes or who knows what happens, then is it possible that we end up with a dead zone because you have housing, big, expensive developments in place that are no longer attractive and would be very expensive to redevelop? I mean, is it a temporary market? Is it a very permanent, expensive solution for a fluid market? Am I even phrasing this the right way? I just don't want that market to go away and then us have something that's not desirable for anyone else to use when we have a dead zone in an extremely economically expensive problem to fix, to make it relevant with the existing conditions.
I mean, I think that's a good question. But I think what's happened and what's happened with Clemson is just about any type of student housing that is over 30 years old right now is basically economically obsolete. and needs to be torn down. The life of these buildings, whereas if you have something downtown, there's a lot of different things you can do to adapt it. But even if you go out all the way to Central and you see some of these buildings that were built even 20, 25 years ago, they're starting to become, candidates for teardowns. So what I would say is in a lot of these downtown areas you're talking about, the value of the property will continue to go up. And at some point it will exceed the value of either renovating or keeping the existing use, whatever that is, and it will get torn down. Because you're right. I mean, there's no way really to predict what's going to happen. But I don't think you'll see those dead zones, and I think you'll see, the planning commission at that point or council at that point, adapt to those changes. You're certainly going to get some type of uses that may be pigeonholed into one thing, but people will adapt, especially when you're talking about property right now that developers are willing to pay $2 or $3 million, $4 million for an acre of property in downtown Clemson. That's what's driving everything. And I think we also have to be mindful of, if you do give an incentive to assemble, and a lot of developers say, well, we can't build up, but let's build, horizontally, much like Earl did. You got to be careful of that too. And it's money is driving this with the amount of rent that they can charge a student to walk. Multiply that times 4 or 5 bedrooms. And you look at the interest rates that are prevailing right now. That's where the pressure is. So I don't know if I answer your question or not, but I think because of the location and everything, you'll have an adaptive reuse pretty quickly, or you'll have a tear down situation.
I think in our downtown areas and close to campus and our commercial zones close to campus, if the student market, if there comes a time when students don't want to come live in the same area together and take some level of and have a campus live amongst 18 to 24-year-olds experience, then we have bigger issues at that point, right? Because I mean, if everything's online, faculty, a bunch of faculty don't live here. There's going to be bigger issues that we're addressing. What appears to be happening, and Clemson appears to be really well positioned, is, we're going to get some centralization. That bigger, state schools are going to survive. And if we were a small regional college, I would be a little bit more worried about those types of things. But it looks like we're in a position where Clemson can probably grow as much as it wants. Over the next number of years, while other smaller regional schools are dying. I don't think we have even though it's a long-term issue, it's going to be a while before we're going to see maybe a fundamental change in that kind of thing occurring, where we would be worried about these giant empty buildings that can't be repurposed, or there's not a market for them. And if we get to that point, again, we've got bigger issues that are going to be occurring. We're going to have, I'm going to be living in Alaska. Ken's going to be living in, South Florida. Larry and Fran will be long departed. Yeah. So, if they're buried here, they'll be the only 2 living here still. All right, Fran.
So just real quickly, Andy's question really does bring up to my mind a point that you made earlier. And that's the point of, if we continue to allow the purpose-based student housing, that means other things won't be built in those same locations, right? And not only will other things not be built, but the price of the land would be going up and up and up and up, making it more difficult for affordable housing and other kind of things. So it comes back to the question of not just, should we allow it, but by allowing it, what are we disallowing or preventing from happening? And And that's a really good question to ask. And that's why I go back to my statement that I would be comfortable saying that, this purpose student housing thing can't be built in commercial areas at all. Not because of them, but because of what allowing that to happen means can't be done in those areas, including downtown. And that's a really interesting perspective to take. And Andy's question made me think about that. If we didn't have that student housing we had downtown right now, what would be there instead? And would it be better?
I think Tom will tell you, we would probably still be looking at the same dilapidated old
Yeah.
student housing that was there. Probably, which I think you can make arguments both ways. Was that better? And economically, I don't know what could occur down there. You've still got some of it. I don't know when the last time you walked back by Foy Creek, for example. Heck, Foy Creek was some of the nicer stuff that was back there. That went away for Campus View and Earl Street. Tom, what do you think? I mean, what do you think the other possibilities from a developer standpoint outside of what was there?
Well, I think for the very first time since I've been in business since 1988 or ever how long it's been, that the idea of people moving back to Clemson, either as alums or people that just want to move back here, I think you're going to start to see that in a big way. I think Elaine just said 2,000 homes that are planned. That's unbelievable for a size of Clemson, right on our edges. And so I think what that means is there will continue to be a bigger demand for non-students to live closer to downtown. I mean, if you look at the Folger Street, Riggs Drive area, those properties have gone up faster as a percentage than anywhere in town. And that's because people, besides the fact that they like the historic eclectic neighborhood, they want to be close to campus, just like the students. They want to be in an area where they can walk to Abernathy Park and get to Bowman and everything else. So I think, whereas I would have said 10 years ago, geez, there's not going to be a whole lot of huge demand for non-students to live close to downtown in a mixed use building. I might feel differently about that today. I think that that's definitely, and it's not just going to be game day people. These are people that they want to retire here, and they're not all Clemson alums. Whether it's the cultural aspects of the university, the Ollie Center, or the obvious, which are sporting. I think that whole effect from Charlotte to Atlanta to Greenville is going to hit Clemson. And as Elaine said, it is. So I do think from a development perspective, there is going to be a demand for that. Now, are people going to pay a couple $1 million an acre? No. But the phenomena that people are paying that kind of price per acre has only really occurred in the last 5 or 6 years. And that's because all these big, monolithic student housing projects started to take hold, and they found how to manipulate zoning or figure out how to use the zoning. I mean, urbanization, this type of smart growth where you have a mixed use building, was started or really incentivized as a result to combat sprawl. So everybody said, hey, let's get back into the central business district and do this. I don't think anybody expected that while Greenville and other cities would have these type of mixed use buildings, that Clemson would have the same with student. I certainly never predicted it. So it's a new thing. And so, but I think there's going to be a lot of different uses.
I mean,
That's what
you look at Penn State, where on the edge of campus, there are fairly high-rise buildings that are residences where they sell them for $500,000 going up. Now, could very well be students living in there, but they're not sort of the student design housing. They really are, as Tom just said, residences for people that wanted to be back in State College on the edge of campus, and are willing to pay to live in those apartments, big money And so we kind of close that off downtown and other places, maybe by the student-based housing. It's just a thought, not a big deal, but just a thought.
Well, that's where like I like the idea of in these areas, and as we think about these overlay districts, talking about those kind of things and say where we have mixed use, we want it to truly be mixed use. All right, because right now our mixed use is not really becoming truly mixed use. It's becoming student housing, one type of housing, and again, retail spaces that are not likely to be filled. So when we think about these things, I think what we say is, like if we say the Uptown Overlay District, we say, here's our vision for that area. And this is why we would go through a charrette and redevelopment process, is to come up with what the vision is for that area. And we say, yeah, there can be, some student housing in here, but we also want to see other types of housing geared towards alums, people returning to campus, live work spaces, because there's also, an opportunity in a market and a partnership for a business development, business incubator, professional office space, that there's civic and public uses, in this area. And again, that it's truly a mixed use, different types of housing, different types of retail, different types of office professional, and having some level of public and civic use. And that is, again, that's a little bit, in my mind, that's a little bit better example of what healthy urban design looks like, as opposed to what can occur under our current zoning ordinance is monolithic student housing with empty retail on the ground floor. Right? I mean, am I wrong in that analysis of that is what our current zoning ordinance allows for that to occur? And right now, economically, that's the most attractive thing for property owners and developers to do in our downtown and other commercial corridors.
Yeah, I would guess, I don't know this, Tom might, that building being built where Blue Heron was, which I think is student housing, if that was instead $500,000 and up apartments, I would think those would sell for people that want to come to Clemson and be much better mix for the city and for downtown, I think. And I think if we can find a way to allow that to happen, that's a good step forward.
Yeah, and that's where we get at what I was just saying, is that you've got developers then have to have a mix. And I don't think it's not healthy to only have that either, that it's all wealthy alums, second homes, or live work people who can afford the $600,000-700,000 and up condo. That's not a super healthy, that doesn't make for healthy mixed use either. And it still is going to have, your same concern with the economics and causing, making it more difficult for any type of workforce housing or affordable housing, or even to protect, some of our historic neighborhoods. That still doesn't eliminate or even it actually in the same way accelerates that problem. And the big issue is that there is a market and there might be a market for that other stuff, but there is a really hot market for high density luxury student housing that's close to campus. So as a developer, are you going to go for the harder project that you have to sell individually and it might take you years to sell and realize your profit? Or are you going to build a project that you're going to have fully leased in year one, and making your money on the front end through the construction, through the initial leasing, and then the sale of the project, down the road? That's, I mean, it's a when you're making that decision, you gotta have a developer with a heart. But we've got property owners that have national level, Wall Street money backed ability and projects in place that are high value, quick return compared to what you're talking about. So most people are gonna, if I'm a property owner, I'm gonna hope for that, right? I'm gonna go for the $3 million an acre over the $1.5 million an acre deal. If that makes sense.
I don't think it's necessarily bad, like you said, Bob, to have students downtown or a mix. But the concern I think you're trying to say is one that I share, in that you can have those things happen, but not in a way that takes away the limited opportunities we have for commercial growth as well as for retail and services. Because instead of sucking up your land, it's not happening, and then that's off the table. And then you don't end up with the things that drive a healthy economy downtown. So if it can be done in a way that doesn't cannibalize your opportunities for retail and commercial, or for goods and services, then maybe it does work. Because we do know that it's better if they're walking instead of driving.
Yeah, and again, it's like let's put the brakes on what we know currently doesn't work, okay, and isn't healthy, and is the most attractive and likely thing for people to go for under our status quo zoning code. And again, we don't have the ability now to control that. I want exactly what you're talking about, Fran, but I would like to see it be truly mixed use that's based on a vision of what we want to occur that will make us a healthier, more economically resilient, better community. And if we don't do something, that's exactly what's going to happen.
So let's write that ordinance. Let's go.
Okay. All right. I'm going to do that right now.
Okay, you done?
I'm done.
Okay.
We done? Had enough? Hour and a half. So I'll create that Google Doc right now and write down some thoughts about what we do to our current ordinance, and then what our what we're looking to do with what we plug back in, either through overlay districts, catalyst areas, to get at some of the things that we're talking about today.
Hey, Bob, when do we get to see each other again?
As soon as possible, Tom.
All right. My psychology professor, Becky Marcon, back in 1986, took us in an outdoor class in the amphitheater. It was the greatest class ever. So I think we should try to do an outdoor class. I've got a couple roof terraces we can use when that time. I'd like to see everybody.
Let's see what the AM temperature is in the next week or so. We've got some thin-skinned people on the call, like Larry and Fran, that
they're from up north. They
are tough. They're tougher than me. When they walk in the cold, they're out there in shorts and t-shirts, and I'm bundled up, so I can't say anything. But yeah, let's think about doing that in the next couple of weeks. That'd be great. All right, everyone, have a good one. Let me know if you need anything, and look for a Google Doc soon.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Bob.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.